We have several updates for you today from Elon Musk, Andrej Karpathy, the ex-Tesla director of Autopilot, Freda Duan, the principal at venture capitalist firm Altimeter Capital, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So first, Elon was interviewed yesterday at the All-In Summit, and he shared new information about Tesla's own supercomputer Dojo 2. Second, Mobileye, a developer of Autopilot, has announced they will stop making their own Lidar sensor and instead just outsource it. Elon made a comment on this. Third, Andrej Karpathy talked about the difference between Tesla and Waymo. And fourth, we'll review a detailed analysis by Freda Duan, principal at Altimeter Capital, as she compares Tesla and Waymo. And finally, NHTSA just proposed a new safety rule that automakers must follow to protect pedestrians. We got Hans Nelson joining us. Hans has his own YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson. Thank you, Hans.
Thanks for having me, Herbert.
We have a lot to cover, especially all these new developments about Tesla's AI and a lot about comparison to Waymo and Tesla's robotaxi. And so that's why I'm glad that you're here, because you follow this very, very closely. So let's go ahead and watch Elon being interviewed at the All-In Summit. And he talked about Tesla's AI team and their Dojo.
Turned on Colossus, which is like the largest private compute cluster, I guess, of GPUs anywhere. Is that right?
It's the most powerful supercomputer of any kind.
Which sort of speaks to what David said and kind of what Peter said, which is a lot of the kind of economic value so far of AI has entirely gone to NVIDIA. But there are people with alternatives, and you're actually one with an alternative. Now, you have a very specific case because Dojo is really about images and large images, huge video. So
the Tesla problem is different from the the sort of LLM problem. The nature of the intelligence what matters in the AI is different to the point you just made, which is that in Tesla's case, the context length is very long. So we've got gigabytes of context.
Gigabyte context windows, yeah.
Yeah, you've got sort of.
I was just bringing it up.
Kind of billions of tokens of context,
right.
Nutty amount of context, because you've got seven cameras, and if you've got several, let's say you've got a minute of several high def cameras, then that's gigabytes. So you need to compress. So the Tesla problem is you've got to compress a gigantic context into the pixels that actually matter, and condense that over a time. And so you've got to in both the time dimension and the space dimension, you've got to compress the pixels in space and the pixels over in time, and then have that inference done on a tiny computer, relatively speaking, a small, a few hundred watts. It's a Tesla-designed AI inference computer, which is, by the way, still the best. There isn't a better thing we could buy from suppliers. So the Tesla-designed AI inference computer that's in the cars is better than anything we could buy from any supplier. Just by the way, that's kind of a.
Well, by the way,
the Tesla AI chip team is extremely good.
Well, you guys, in the design, there was a technical paper and there was a deck that somebody on your team from Tesla published, and it was stunning to me. You designed your own transport control layer over Ethernet. You were like, Ethernet's not good enough for us.
Yeah.
So you had this TT-CoE or something, and you're like, we're just going to reinvent Ethernet and string these chips. It's pretty incredible stuff that's happening over there.
Yeah. No, the team, the Tesla chip design team is extremely good.
But is there a world where, for example, other people over time that need, some sort of video use case or image use case could theoretically, you'd say, why not? I have some extra cycles over here, so it should kind of make you a competitor of NVIDIA. It's not intentionally per se, but.
There's training and inference, and we do have those two projects at Tesla. We've got Dojo, which is the training computer, and then our inference chip, which is in every car, inference computer. So, and Dojo, we've only had Dojo 1. Dojo 2 is, we should have Dojo 2 in volume towards the end of next year. And that will be, we think, sort of comparable to sort of a B200 type system, a training system. So I guess there's some potential for that to be used as a service. But like, Dojo is just kind of like, I mean, we're I guess I have like some improved confidence in Dojo, but I think we won't really know how good Dojo is until probably version 3. Like, it usually takes 3 major iterations on a technology for it to be excellent, and we'll only have the 2nd major iteration next year. The 3rd iteration, I don't know, maybe late, 26 or something like that.
Okay, so he said quite a number of things here. He'll have more improved confidence in Dojo. It could be possibly use his service, and he's going to do Dojo 2 late next year. Any thoughts on what you heard?
Yeah, there's a number of interesting things. If we want to, maybe start with the last thing and go backwards on Dojo, it's interesting to me that he said that Dojo V2 could be done next year and that they could be entering production on it, because we've heard from TSMC that they have a plan to roll out the special process that Dojo is operating on is a system on wafer with chip on wafer integrated into it. So all that to say, they're doing several layers of stacking in the vertical axis on these chips in order to achieve better networking and better performance. One of the things that we heard from TSMC this year is that Dojo is the first chip to use this new process where they're doing a chip on wafer on substrate. And what that allows them to do is have some 3D stacking of some elements and use basically a wafer scale size chip in the Dojo D1 tiles. There is a further iteration of that where they're actually able to put the high bandwidth memory chips on top of chips that are then in this big tile. And that is a pathway to doing a 40x on the performance of current Dojo chips. But they've said that that is not going to come online until, I believe they said 2026 or 2027. And so if we stack that up with Elon's timeline of saying that version 3 of Dojo would be 2026, then my guess is what he's saying is that, on the optimistic end of things, that Dojo version 3 would be the one that actually takes advantage of that next iteration of TSMC's process where they can go ahead and integrate their high bandwidth memory on top of their chips. And so that means we've got a Dojo V2 iteration that we haven't seen yet that is an increase in performance from here, but it doesn't go all the way to that 40x performance increase that TSMC implied. And so I think that's interesting in a couple of dimensions, but I would say that Elon is remaining very cautious here on the development of Dojo and its ability to be competitive, especially for general use cases. I will be surprised personally if Dojo is something that people are going to want to train on to develop tools that are competitive with ChatGPT that are strictly LLMs. But I do think it is purpose built for and has a good potential to outcompete NVIDIA over time in training that is video based. And I think there's going to be a lot of real world use cases that all move towards video based training. And whether that's going to be for Optimus, whether that's going to be for full self-driving type applications, we're going to see more and more real world robotics AI applications that need something that is built much more like Dojo than what NVIDIA is currently doing. And so I think by the time we get to that V3 of Dojo, there's a good shot that that market could actually be growing relative to the market for other AI applications. And that could make that demand for Dojo style chips to be something that is competing with and potentially even eclipsing the ChatGPT style, very abstract. We're working with language. And that goes back to the point that Elon was making that was dealing with the type of challenge that Tesla's facing in doing full self-driving, where instead of having language, which is pretty easily compressed down into tokens, you can have lots and lots and lots of information that are stored in megabytes of data instead of video data where you have gigabytes or terabytes of data. That those type of applications they're just different. And so Tesla solving that challenge, I think, really opens up the doorway long term, to, an entirely different type of AI related product.
Thank you for explaining that. I think it's obviously good news. It's sounding like he's much more confident about it. He did say that we won't know for sure how great Dojo is until the third iteration. So that's a year, 2 years away from now. But that's talking about whether it's going to be used for like selling it as a service. But regardless, on the way for helping it now too. So other news, of course, Elon was correct when he talked about Lidar, and we're seeing more and more information about that. Here's Mobileye announcing that they're going to end the internal Lidar development. They are a maker of autonomous technology that other companies can license from them. And, this is it. They've basically chosen to end the internal development of next-gen frequency modulated continuous wave LiDARs. Now, some people are saying, well, they're just ending it and they're just going to buy it outsourced. Doesn't mean that they don't really think it's correct. But if you look at what they actually say, they go, we now believe that the availability of LiDAR is less essential to our roadmap for eyes-off systems. Okay, so it's less essential based on a variety of factors. One is our own computer vision perception is progressing quite nicely. We have increased clarity and the performance of our internally developed imaging radar. And we have continued cost reductions on third-party LiDAR units, so we don't need to do it ourselves. It looks like that they're going to lay off about 100 employees by the end of 2024. That's their moving. In the meantime, a reminder that in 2019, Elon said LiDAR is a fool's errand. Anyone relying on LiDAR is doomed. Expensive sensors that are unnecessary, you'll see. And he looks like he's being called correctly, because you're seeing a lot of companies now announcing they're pulling away from LiDAR. Elon just knows what he's talking about. Here's Xiaopeng recently announced their plans to ditch LiDAR. Now, of course, you got Mobileye saying this, and then Luminar laid off 20% of their employees. Business is struggling. So here is Elon talking about LiDAR.
What we're going to explain to you today is that LiDAR is a fool's errand. And anyone relying on LiDAR is doomed. Doomed. Expensive sensors that are unnecessary. It's like having a whole bunch of expensive appendices. Like one appendix is bad. Well, now they want to put a whole bunch of them. That's ridiculous. You'll see.
Yeah. And then he replied to that news yesterday. He said that, LiDAR looks smart if you think about fuel cells and hydrogen combustor cars as well. So these are things that the OEMs are doing: fuel cells, hydrogen, LiDAR. And he's saying these are all wrong. And then he's going to be proven correct. And so far, it's looking like he's correct.
Yeah, I just think it's funny that this is still a conversation. I mean, so the thing that made this blatantly obvious back when he started to make these predictions is that, you have to have vision. You can't drive the car without vision, because there's a lot of things that LiDAR just doesn't give you. It doesn't give you what your road signs say. It gives you locations of objects, but then any contextual data that's beyond that, it doesn't provide. So, can't read the lines on the road, for instance. And so you have to have vision in order to drive. It's just impossible not to do it without that. And so then, okay, if you have to have vision, the question is, can you do with vision what you accomplish with LiDAR as far as locating objects in the scene and all your drivable space and all that stuff? And the answer is, with enough intelligence, absolutely, you can do that. And so when you really look at it and say, okay, hey, cameras, they're way cheaper than LiDAR sensors, and they give you light that travels in the same wavelength as these LiDAR light waves do. And we can, with intelligence, transform that into the same end result as we would get with LiDAR. Then why don't we just do that? And we'll use, $10, $15 camera sensors instead of tens of thousands of dollars for these LiDAR sensors. And we just have to be really good at software, which we're already going to have to be really good at. The entire FSD problem is a huge software problem, and thinking that you can solve a huge software problem by sucking at the intelligence piece of it and then supplementing your suckiness with these super expensive sensors is just ridiculous. And, after the ImageNet competition back in 2012, where we saw that neural nets can understand, the difference in cats versus dogs just through neural networks. It's like, oh, this is the final piece. Like we have to have neural nets that can understand the world through these cameras, and that was the piece that unlocked the capability to do what we're doing. And you just have to say we have to be really, really good at that thing, and once we are, then this is solved, and it makes the Lidar irrelevant. And that's been Elon's position for a long time. I think from first principles it's been obvious for a long time. A lot of people just are still pursuing the sunk cost fallacy that they've invested a lot in this technology, whether it's from their ecosystem depends on it, or they are directly invested in the lidars themselves, and they are continuing to pursue this thing well past the point where it should just be left by the wayside.
Don't know why they're doing it, but they've invested, like you said. Okay, so let's watch Andrej Karpathy, the ex-director of autopilot for Tesla. He was interviewed recently, and he talked about the difference between Tesla and Waymo. It's awesome to listen to him talk about it because, again, it's not just Elon, right? This is actual people that work at Tesla. When you hear what they say, you kind of put everything a little bit pieces together closely.
The first time I took Waymo was actually a decade ago, almost exactly, 2014 or so. And it was a friend of mine who worked there, and he gave me a demo. And it drove me around the block 10 years ago. And it was basically perfect drive 10 years ago. And it took 10 years to go from like a demo that I had to a product I can pay for that's in a city scale and is expanding, etc. I think personally Tesla is ahead of Waymo, and I know it doesn't look like that, but I'm still very bullish on Tesla and its self-driving program. I think that Tesla has a software problem, and I think Waymo has a hardware problem, is the way I put it. And I think software problems are much easier. Tesla has a deployment of all these cars on Earth, like at scale. And I think Waymo needs to get there. And so the moment Tesla sort of like gets to the point where they can actually deploy this and it actually works, I think it's going to be, really incredible.
How far away do you think we are from the software problem turning the corner in terms of getting to some equivalency? Because obviously, to your point, if you look at a Waymo car, it has a lot of very expensive LiDAR and other sort of sensors built into the car so it can do what it does. It sort of helps support the software system. And so if you could just use cameras, which is the Tesla approach, then you effectively get rid of enormous costs / complexity, and you can do it in many different types of cars. When do you think that transition happens?
I mean, in the next few years, I'm hoping like something like that. But actually what's really interesting about that is I'm not sure that people are appreciating that Tesla actually does use a lot of expensive sensors. They just do it at training time. So there are a bunch of cars that drive around with LiDARs. They do a bunch of stuff that like doesn't scale, and they have extra sensors, etc. And they do mapping and all this stuff. You're doing it at training time, and then you're distilling that into a test time package that gets deployed to the cars and is vision only. And it's like an arbitrage on like sensors and like expense.
Yeah.
And so I think it's actually kind of a brilliant strategy that I don't think is fully appreciated. And I think it's going to work out well because the pixels have the information. And I think the network will be capable of doing that.
Yeah, there you go. Love it, love it, love it. So you're using it at the training time. And then he talked about how, Waymo's hardware problem has not been solved. They're still out there creating, the price is supposed to fall dramatically. It hasn't happened. Meanwhile, we're seeing progress with software problem for Tesla. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I mean, even if they solve their hardware problem in terms of cost, they're still dependent on some, external manufacturer in order to be able to supply them with. I mean, Tesla has 5 million plus vehicles on the road that, if the software problem is solved, can instantly turn into robo-taxis. Waymo has a couple of thousand cars, and definitely in the tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 at maximum cars total in their fleet. And so, you're talking about many orders of magnitude in difference between the sizes of those fleets. And that to me is a huge risk if I'm an investor in Waymo. Like, how are you going to get to this very large number of vehicles deployed based on like who are your partners? What's their ability to scale to large volumes? And man, it sure seems like whoever that person is has, leverage over you in your overall business strategy. And, there's lots of just big question marks on that front that to me seem like they are very much unsolved. And, prototypes are easy. Production is hard. If I had to pick one or the other problem to have, I'd rather have the software problem to solve than the hardware one.
Nice. All right. So I'm going to show Freda Duan her analysis. And Freda Duan is an analyst principal at Altimeter Capital, and she's been doing fantastic work here, comparing and following Tesla's autonomy and robotaxi path. So she's comparing Waymo's hardware problem based on this recent, interview. Andrej made a thought-provoking statement. Tesla may still have a software problem, but Waymo has a hardware problem. Between the two, software is much easier to solve, just like you said. Now, I'm going to go through this really quickly, guys. I apologize ahead of time. I'm not going to go deep into every one of her analysis, but it's here for you to look at. So she's breaking down the Waymo's unit economics, and she's looking at, per car per year, per mile, and took a look at the operating margin. And so, it says here that Waymo has the potential to be a highly profitable and hugely disruptive business. If Waymo could match Tesla's hardware costs, its operating margin would hit 30%. This is the key hardware problem. With Tesla's hardware costs, self-driving can be priced at a 40% discount to Uber and Lyft, whether on a per mile per trip basis. She will do a roundup at the end where she explains exactly how Waymo and Tesla could affect Uber and Lyft. So she goes through Waymo's unit economics, saying that the ex-CEO of Waymo said that Waymo could be profitable in markets like San Francisco if you take into account their revenue, their depreciation assumptions, their hardware costs, again, depreciation here, their revenue assumptions are right here, trips per week, fleet size, 800 vehicles in California, miles per trip, and how much gross margin per vehicle. So let's take a look at this. So, and then you add the other costs. And the interesting thing, the remote assistance, she's assuming one assistant for every 5 cars. If this ratio improves, costs could drop, and Tesla may not even need this, or it's going to be much, much less, ratio of assistant per car. Insurance, charging, cleaning, repairs. And here's her summary. Uber and Lyft currently earns $2.90 per mile, 30% take rate. So they get 0.1 per mile, 0.8, 80 cents per mile of revenue, 10 cents per mile of EBITDA. Now, if Waymo can solve its hardware problem, a very big if, though they're working on it with OEMs, it could potentially undercut Uber. So they will be profitable. However, Waymo's operations would still be confined to geofenced areas. If Tesla can solve its software problem, maintain an exponential rate of improvement in disengagements, it could be a truly disruptive force in the entire market. So that's the difference between them. Yes, sure, if Waymo does succeed with a hardware problem, it could still be profitable, but it's going to be limited. Versus Tesla, it's going to just be disruptive.
I really don't understand that second paragraph there where she's saying that, if they solve their hardware problem, and then she supposes that, okay, if they do solve that, then they're still geofenced. Like, to me, the only solution to the hardware problem in terms of cost is to go completely vision based and not to have this strict rules based system behind you, in which case then you do have a general driving solution. So I'm a little bit confused by her overall argument. Maybe there is a legitimate argument to be made that they will do some sort of, instead of a high definition, LiDAR based down to the millimeter location accuracy thing, to a little bit less, a little bit lower resolution, but still very constraining 3D constructed map of some sort, that they'll still need to be geofenced, but they won't necessarily need to use LiDARs. I guess that is a possible thing. But man, you're talking about a huge leap in capability there that seems to be just diametrically opposed to the way that Waymo is building their software right now. And I don't know, how you arrive at lower hardware cost based on the current operating model of Waymo.
Oh, and Waymo also made a couple announcements themselves. They said that transparency and accountability are key to Waymo's mission. And so they've shared a website now that shows how the Waymo driver, was what they call their Waymo tool, is making roads safer. And so they've got this kind of place where they're saying 84% fewer airbag deployments, 73% fewer injury-causing crashes, 48% fewer police-reported crashes, and they're kind of show you how it's changing over time in our first 22 million miles. compared to human driving, same distances in the cities where we operate. So that's great that they're doing that. There's also a report just yesterday about S&P Global Mobility, self-driving cars gain momentum. Most of the report is basically basic. They're just giving you kind of a summary of what's happening. But this part here in the ending, I thought was interesting, where they say that, it's slow. The broader deployment was a lot lower. Of course, COVID slowed everything down. Decisions by OEMs to prioritize, battery electric vehicle over autonomous seem to stall. These kind of things have happened. And this is the part that many of us are contesting, is their very ending, where they talk about their expectations. So here's what they're saying. Their forecast for autonomy. Okay, sales of autonomous vehicles in the US in 2034, which is like 10 years from now, is only going to be 230,000 autonomous vehicles. That's it. And in China, it's going to be 1.5 million. And which is 5% of all sales, and only 1.5%. So in the US, it'll only be 1.5% of all sales. And then in China, it'll be 5% of all sales. In Europe, it's only gonna be 37,000 units. I don't get how these guys are thinking that this is such tiny numbers. What's your reaction to that?
It reminds me of, when Tony Seba does his pieces on solar energy adoption or wind or batteries, these things, they'll show what the industry forecasts were, and they're always these linear numbers. And, each year it becomes clear at a certain point that you're on an exponential trajectory, but every year the projection is just like, oh, we're going to assume a super conservative linear forecast forward. And, they end up missing by, many orders of magnitude what the reality of the situation ends up being. And this is a forecast that reminds me of that pretty much to a T. But I love it because a lot of people listen to S&P and they believe these ridiculous numbers, and that provides opportunities to us as investors to recognize their bullshit and make smarter investment decisions on it.
Yeah. Love it. So NHTSA also came out with new rules. This is great to see, because as they're watching this development of this technology, they're putting new rules, and it's going to force the automakers to all adopt. And eventually, they're going to have to license this from Tesla, because they can't do this as well as Tesla can. NHTSA is proposing a new rule for pedestrian safety. They require new passenger vehicles to be designed to reduce the risk of serious to fatal injuries. Now, this rule, though, is just basically saying that we need to simulate head-to-hood impact. So when a car hits it, and you have that variety of heads and how it's going to be impacted. So, at one point people thought that the Cybertruck was a killer, when it's actually the front is actually much lower than where the front is, the grill is. No, it's not a grill. There's no grill there, but where most cars' front area is a lot lower than other trucks. But that's really critical for when somebody hits it. So this is a new vehicle safety standard. I'm not going to read through this. I just explained it a little bit more, but it's, again, available for people to read. This guy, Joey Bagatone, it's nice, said the cost to benefit ratio is absurd. Maybe 67 lives per year. Better to focus on technology that prevents these accidents in the first place. Alternatively, what's cheaper? Require pedestrians to wear helmets. Yeah, that's funny. He's right about preventing those accidents in the first place, but it's baby steps, right?
Well, I think the proposed legislation is kind of ridiculous, because it is going to cost so much money to make these changes. And really, the main culprit of the need for these changes is the increasing safety requirements on cars. It's NHTSA's own regulations that have caused cars to get so much bigger in order to withstand all these crash safety tests that they do. Like, look at a Tundra today versus a Tundra from 20 years ago. Well, that Tundra today is significantly more safe for the occupants of the vehicle, but it's also much bigger than it used to be, and it costs more to make, and it comes at the expense of the safety of pedestrians. But it is NHTSA's own regulations that have caused this issue. And like I said, it's, a complicated set of trade-offs of safety. And for 67 lives in the course of a year, like, obviously 67 lives are 67 lives, and that's important. But I think that, if you look at this as an investor and think about it from return on an investment standpoint, if we spent that same amount of money that we're going to have to spend on changing these crash tests, we could probably make a lot of progress in just standardizing automated emergency braking across the industry and holding it to a higher standard. And I think that would have a much, much higher impact. And that's not even to say anything about more advanced forms of automatic driving assisting systems like FSD.
Yeah. Here's the example. 30 Tesla showed that human pilots almost hit a pedestrian while Tesla's FSD waits for all the pedestrians. I'll show that clip. Here's Tesla account forwarding that and saying FSD will be significantly safer than humans. This is what they should be authorizing and making
this
happen.
Looks really busy. So we have a stop. Oh, cross traffic has a stop too, though, so it should be all right. I would wait for that person. I don't know what you are doing. Yeah, it's the guy to the right's turn. But then we're going to have to wait for some pedestrians. Oh, boy. He did not see her. So, yeah.
Wow.
That's a time where humans don't do that great, and FSD can really excel. It's hard, he's looking at a lot of different things, and he just didn't see that person because she did cross kind of strangely, and that was our turn. That Jeep should not have taken that, especially at the speed he did. Man, there's a lot going on, and FSD handles all of it. Beautiful.
That's FSD. And then I wanted to show this, which is self-driving bus in China. Look at that. Oh, it's awesome. Yeah. And the reason I'm showing that is like, so a couple points, right? One is we were saying earlier about Waymo. This is how Waymo can fight to stay alive, the Cyber Joe says. Buses with predetermined routes is perfect for the model Waymo has with HD maps and expensive Lidar. $150,000 per car is crazy, but $150,000 bus is not a stretch, especially if it can run autonomously carrying 10, 20 passengers, making it profitable. So there is a role for that. And I wanted to show this also because this is something that Elon proposed, and we saw a video, Boring Company, 7 years ago. And if you take a close look, one of my audience members sent this to me and reminded me of my own prediction of what I think the robotaxi is going to be. Take a look at this closer look. I don't think it's going to be all glass, but I do think it's going to look cyber-like, and it's going to be more like this than those two-seater compact car that everybody thinks that's what the robotaxi is going to be. I think the robotaxi is going to be multiple people can get in, not just one person or two, despite what everybody says about its most 90+% of trips is one person. Well, thoughts on that?
I think that the smaller car is definitely more likely to be the first car, but eventually we'll have,
right.
There's already lots of different form factors of vehicles today, and that's because they all have a use case that makes those form factors necessary. And eventually, yes, there will be robo-taxis that are more like buses or, trucks or, compact cars or limos, like all those different form factors make sense at some point.
Thank you so much, Hans. We covered so much about FSD, Waymo, and quotes or interviews directly with Andrej Karpathy and Elon himself. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.